Mr. Speaker, honourable members, the horrific, unforecastable, unpredictable natural disaster, a 1 in a 100 event at least, which struck St. Vincent on Christmas Eve into Christmas Day 2013 and its consequences, have altered profoundly the immediate socio-economic context of the 2014 budget. The upshot of this is that the 2014 estimates, which were approved in December 2013 and upon which the 2014 appropriation bill is based, has to be supplemented within the next 4 to 6 weeks or thereabouts. Accordingly, this budget, which is being presented today, is interim in nature. This does not mean that it is provisional or temporizing in fact or law. This budget is aimed at strengthening our socio-economic base for recovery and reconstruction after a natural disaster in a context of ongoing global economic uncertainty and downside risks. The supplementary estimates and supplementary appropriation bill, which would of necessity and desirability come to this Honourable House sooner rather than later, would contain both altered and additional provisioning to reflect the profoundly changed circumstances of our country. Alterations and additions are to be expected on both the recurrent and capital sides of the approved estimates. It is unlikely that capital projects for which funding has already been specifically sourced for particular projects and which are ready for imminent implementation would be shelved. However, the scope of some existing capital projects is likely to be altered and additional allocations made. Further, capital projects of an urgent and critical nature, not now present in the approved estimates for 2014, would be included in the supplementary estimates for supplementary appropriation. Clearly, there would be a reshaping of budgetary priorities in accordance with the requisites of addressing effectively the extant humanitarian challenge arising from the natural disaster and of implementing in a focused way the grand project of rehabilitation and recovery under the rubric Arise SVG with the 6 R's: relief, reconstruction, roads including bridges, river defenses, reforestation, and relocation including housing. Now more than ever, Mr. Speaker, we must realize that nothing ever stands still. We must lift ourselves up to be stronger and better. We must go forward, not backward. We must arise from this terrible natural disaster and human suffering in dignity and strength. We must meet the daunting challenges ahead with clarity of purpose, unity, discipline, hard and smart work. We must have faith in our individual and collective future, knowing always that faith is made perfect, made complete with works, with deeds. We must learn to love our neighbors like ourselves and to practice that love daily. Above all, we must heed the spirit and teaching of the prophet Isaiah. So do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. For I am the Lord your God, who takes hold of your right hand and says to you, do not fear, I will help you. God, the helper of Israel, of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and of all nations, will fulfill his promise to us. He is a merciful God, and we thank him for the abundant blessings bestowed upon us. Mr. Speaker, Although my government is yet to finalize the full assessment of the damage and loss caused by the Christmas floods and landslides, it is evident from the preliminary appraisal that it will take hundreds of millions of dollars to tackle satisfactorily the combined humanitarian challenge and the rehabilitation and reconstruction exercise. Excessive rainfall in the mountainous interior of the northern half of St. Vincent, particularly on the northeast and northwest, amounting to about 10 inches of rainfall in less than 5 hours, precipitated the extraordinary floods, landslides, and consequential loss and damage, the likes of which the country had never seen, never experienced in living memory. The rainfall distribution at the 5 stations for the period 9 p.m. on the 24th of December to 1 a.m. on the 25th of December 2013 tells an amazing story. I need not go through each detail, except to say that at the Rabaka Climate Station, 12.26 inches of rainfall fell, amounting to 311.4 millimeters of rain, extraordinary rainfall. Accordingly, the government declared a level 2 disaster. A declaration of a disaster area was made too in respect of geographical locations on the western side of St. Vincent, including the Vermont Valley, all the way down to Buccaneers, and Spring Village, Rosebank, Darkview, Kitty Bodell, Chatterville, Fitchews, and Richmond. And on the northeastern side, including South Rivers, O'Brien's Valley, Dixon, and Spring Village, Georgetown, all the way up to Fancy. Over 11,000 persons, or over 10% of the population of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, were directly affected in these disaster areas. By December the 31st, 2013, over 50,000 persons, or roughly 1/2 of the population, were still adversely affected by extensive disruption of water supplies. The weather event was clearly a significant one of national proportions. It was neither localized nor merely episodic. The havoc wrought to the physical infrastructure is huge. 14 bridges destroyed, 14 other bridges severely damaged, several miles of secondary roads and feeder roads ravaged, making certain habitable and farming areas impassable. The many rivers overflow their banks and cause widespread destruction. The forests have been substantially denuded beyond 10% of the total forest area, and 662 houses have been damaged or destroyed, some 300 of which, objectively speaking, require relocation. Occupants of these houses lost much or all of their belongings, including the following items: furniture, stoves, fridges, beds and mattresses, cooking utensils, electrical appliances of one sort or another, laptops and computers, gas bottles, household pets, chicken and pigs. In less than 5 hours of rainfall, floods and landslides, hundreds of families have been reduced from vulnerability to indigence and from poverty to a dirt-poor condition. Large numbers of people have been suffering harsh conditions as a consequence of the natural disaster, although the humanitarian response has eased some of the pain and hardship. The journey to recovery would be long and difficult. Psychological anguish and trauma evident among the suffering and vulnerable people. Most painful of all has been the loss of life. 9 persons died and 3 are still missing. Their names would long be etched in our personal and collective memory. An appropriate memorial must be erected. Their names are required to be here recorded: Mr. Wolsey Nanton, of Rosebank, Horner Nanton of Rosebank, Hazel Batiste of Rosebank, Bernard Nanton of Rosebank, Ioane Nanton Bartholomew of Rosebank, Raymond Gonzalez of Manning Village, Beira, Desmond Wilson of Vermont, Keslia James of Cane Grove, Charlene Headley, 2-year-old of Cane Grove and Canada. The missing persons are Mrs. Joselle Morgan Small, Sheila Edwards of Bookament. Mrs. Joselle Morgan Small is of Rilland Hill, and Miss Inka Jack, aged 12 years, of Bookament. The preliminary assessment of the damage tells a horrendous story. 1. The actual material damage of 662 houses is estimated at $24.6 million. Assuming that a relocation of 300 of these houses is to be done, the cost to the housing sector would be an estimated $45 million. 2. The cleanup costs incurred by Braxa, $5 million. 3. The damage and loss to the Milton Cato Memorial Hospital, $5.5 million. 4. The damage and loss to CWSA, $12 million. 5. The damage and loss to Vinlec, $23 million. 6. The damage and loss to private sector businesses outside of agriculture, $5 million. 7. The damage and loss to the agricultural sector, livestock and fisheries, $8.4 million. 1,100 farmers have been adversely affected. 8. Damage and loss to the physical infrastructure, roads, bridges, river defenses, buildings, state buildings, $221.1 million. 9. Damage and loss to forests, $24 million. 10. Estimated cost of damage and loss to household items, $7 million. 11. Estimated cost of providing relief humanitarian support to affected families for 6 months, $2.4 million. The aggregate cost of the damage and loss is estimated preliminarily at $330 million. This amounts to over 17% of the gross domestic product of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. This aggregate number is the preliminary estimate of the government of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Experts from the World Bank have provided a preliminary estimate of $291.4 million Eastern Caribbean dollars, or over 15% of GDP. The World Bank's number underestimates the damage to agriculture by nearly $5 million and does not include any damage assessment of the forests. However, the Food and Agricultural Organization estimates damage and loss to the agricultural sector of EC $8.4 million and to forestry of EC $24 million. The government's estimate is slightly higher than that of the World Bank's in a few areas, but is at one with the bank on the major areas of infrastructure, housing, health, electricity, water, and sewerage. It is a monumental blow to our society and economy. Damage and loss of between 15 and 17% of GDP is huge and devastating. The swift and focused response to the disaster by the government, the state agencies, the private sector, the civil society organizations, the regional and international communities, the Vincentian diaspora overseas, and the resilient people of St. Vincent and the Grenadines as a whole ensured that the immediate humanitarian or relief challenge did not metamorphose into a humanitarian disaster. A continuing humanitarian challenge exists, but it is being creditably managed. Still, much work remains to be done. Mr. Speaker, the government has been very active and focused in providing leadership to the recovery and rehabilitation process. Immediately, we have had to address the humanitarian relief challenge and remediation, however makeshift or temporary, of the physical infrastructure. At the same time, we have to lay the basis for the very costly medium-term recovery and rehabilitation. Within days of the natural disaster, the state-owned Vinlec restored electricity to all of St. Vincent. Similarly, critical facilities such as the E.T. Joshua Airport and the Milton Cato Memorial Hospital were flooded, and were made fully operational swiftly with prompt remedial work. In the case of the hospital, 4 of its wards, including the pediatric ward, had to be temporarily located. Several pieces of medical equipment at the hospital were damaged and or destroyed, including the vital CT scan machine, the only one in our country, which was rendered inoperable by the floods and is unlikely to be up and running before the end of February 2014 at the earliest. Other restorative work at the hospital is proceeding apace. Within 3 hours of torrential rains, 8 of the 11 water systems of CWSA were put out of commission. Extensive restorative work was required. The heroic efforts of the management staff and ancillary employees of CWSA ensured the resumption of water supply in stages to substantially the entire island by January 4, 2014. Throughout the period of water shortage, the CWSA, in conjunction with the Emergency Operating Center of the National Emergency Management Organization, NEMO, the Ministry of Works, the Helicopter Service of the Government of Trinidad and Tobago, other governments and external agencies, the private sector, other entities such as the Red Cross and the Mustique Charitable Trust, churches and caring nationals assisted with the distribution of water to those communities which were in need. Meanwhile, NEMO spearheaded the establishment of 8 shelters, 5 of them at schools, 2 at learning resource centers, and 1 at the academy in Richmond Vale. Over 300 persons were initially in the shelters. By January the 5th, 2014, 7 shelters remained open with 225 persons. Another 400 persons in the communities were provided with food packages. By the weekend of January the 11th, 2014, the shelters in the 5 schools were closed and the occupants housed in learning resource centers or community centers, or in houses rented by government, or in dwelling places of families or friends. 5 shelters currently are in operation with 175 occupants. All schools reopened for instruction 1 week late on January the 13th, 2014. Affected persons in the communities are being provided with ongoing relief through NEMO and other governmental and non-governmental agencies. At the same time, the Ministry of Health has been carrying out a program of psychological and social counseling of the affected persons with the professional health personnel and the counselors employed in the educational system. While we attend to the individual and community material needs of affected persons, it is important to provide support services of psychological and social counseling and guidance to them. Immediate material help to assist in meeting the humanitarian relief challenge came from government institutions and agencies regionally and internationally. We are most grateful. The response, particularly from regional governments and institutions, gives life and meaning to our Caribbean community. The government of St. Vincent and the Grenadines is mobilizing resources, financial and technical, for the Grand Rehabilitation and Recovery Project. To this end, we have been in contact with the governments of several traditional and non-traditional allies. Importantly, too, my government has been engaged in relevant dialogue on rehabilitation and recovery with the local financial institutions and contractors from St. Vincent and the Grenadines and the region. The World Bank, the European Union, the Caribbean Development Bank, the ALBA Petro-Carib Nexus, the United Nations Development Program, the Organization of American States, the Pan American Health Organization, the International Labour Organization, the OECS and CARICOM. More details on these contacts, dialogues, and mobilized resources will be available at the time of the presentation of the supplementary estimates and the supplementary appropriation bill. Mr. Speaker, even in these early days of recovery and reconstruction, beyond the relief or humanitarian effort, it is evident that a priority list of actions must include repairing the damaged houses, rebuilding those which were completely destroyed, and relocating those houses which are in imminent danger. Providing stores, fridges, and mattresses which were damaged or destroyed to the persons who have been affected. Completing the cleaning up by Brexit. Rebuilding with urgency destroyed or damaged bridges, including those at Caracal, Miss Jane, Bellevue, Pyropon Ford in Sandy Bay, God Save the Queen Bridge at Overland, London Bridge, Bottomtown Bridge in Oya, O'Brien's Valley, Vermont Darkview, Top Shafts in Chateauvilliers, Takata in Fichus. Temporary Bailey bridges have to be installed at several of these and other locations. Mr. Speaker, 100 meters of Bailey bridges should be arriving here on a French vessel on Friday. Engaging immediately with the restorative work as follows, among others: Buckerman, Vermont River Defense in Spring, River Defense at Teviot Zenga Rivers in Mesopotamia, River Defense and Plainfield Wall at Sandy Bay, River Training in Fancy, Slope Protection at Belial and Darkview, and River Defense in South Rivers. Promptly reviewing for speedy corrective action pre-existing projects such as Montiong Bridge, the Congo Valley Roads and Bridges, and Perseverance Road and Bridges. Immediate grading and basic restorative work on several miles of feeder roads, particularly in North Windward, North Central Windward, South Leeward, and North Leeward. Prompt basic restoration of village and secondary roads in all affected areas, addressing immediately the rebuilding of the agriculture and livestock subsectors in the affected areas, initiating measures for reforestation and curbing the irresponsible behavior of forest users, moving swiftly to restore the damage and loss at the Milton Cato Memorial Hospital, the CWSA, and VINLEC, and assisting the damaged private sector businesses in their rebuilding. Mr. Speaker, nearly 80% of the damage and loss occasioned by the storm are in physical infrastructure. Roads and bridges, $22.1 million. VINLEC, $23 million. CWSA, $12 million. Additionally, damage and loss to housing is $24.6 million. And $24 million to forestry. Clearly, the recovery and reconstruction program has to be phased. In this regard, the various ministries are at work in planning the work program for implementation over time. The Chief Engineer, for example, has already provided me with a preliminary list of must-do projects immediately, and his office is addressing the scheduling of the medium-term reconstruction. And then there is a critical issue of mobilizing the financing for all of this, in addition to the necessary ongoing capital projects and normal government functions. More on the financing of the reconstruction would be addressed when I return to this Honourable House within 6 or so weeks with the supplementary estimates and the supplementary appropriation bill. Mr. Speaker, a normal rule of thumb is that between 10 to 15% of the estimated damage and loss is required immediately to commence the rehabilitation and recovery beyond the humanitarian relief. Accordingly, I am immediately mobilizing at least between $35 and $50 million in new monies. Thus far, I have assembled over $30 million, including some $10.5 million in credit for building materials. And I haven't included any of the CDB money. I haven't included any special money from the World Bank. These are other monies. I am confident that my government will be able to access the resources immediately required. On the medium-term reconstruction, my government is already exploring avenues for financing. The presentation by the World Bank team of experts of their preliminary loss and damage assessment, which I accept for this purpose, to the representatives of several governments and donors last Friday, January the 17th, in Barbados, is an important staging post in what would be a challenging exercise. Mr. Speaker, it is being proposed that sometime within the next 3 months, an international donors conference be held to receive pledges for the rehabilitation and recovery processes in the countries affected by the Christmas disasters, namely Dominica, St. Lucia, and St. Vincent and the Grenadines. The chairman of the OECS, Prime Minister Spencer of Antigua and Barbuda, is leading this quest with the support of the OECS and CARICOM Secretariat. The assessments by the respective governments of these 3 affected countries and the reports by the World Bank, the FAO, and ECLAC would provide background material and context for the conference. Mr. Speaker, the budget address which I'm presenting today and which will follow from that initial statement on the disaster and how we are handling it. This address seeks to lift the level of discourse on our nation's socio-economic condition in the extant circumstances by placing the macroeconomic options before us and setting out an appropriate strategic path. I want all of us in this Parliament to take an approach in this debate which would lift the level of discourse on our nation's socio-economic condition in the current circumstances by placing the macroeconomic options before us and setting out an appropriate strategic path with programmatic elements within that strategic path. Accordingly, I turn first to the general and specific issues and considerations arising from our recent economic history, which underpin the broad strategic thrust and relevant details of the Appropriation Bill 2014, emerging from the approved estimates for 2014 in our quest to fortify the country's socio-economic base. I turn to a summary of some of the relevant socio-economic issues for the period 2001 to 2014 as an important backdrop. Mr. Speaker, honourable members, this is my 13th consecutive budget speech as Minister of Finance. When the Unity Labour Party was elected to office on March 28, 2001, we inherited an economy, polity and society in severe distress, an administrative apparatus in shambles, and an awful international image. The details of the economic, social, and political distress are a matter of record and have been documented elsewhere by objective observers and do not require a repetition here. But they are of relevance in grasping the journey of that my administration has had to travel, in cleaning up the mess we met and in moving our country forward in progress. Mr. Speaker, the broad economic history of the last 3 decades would show that moderate to robust economic growth of the 1980s had given way after 1992, the last year of unrestrained market preferences in Britain for our bananas, to a condition of low to below moderate economic growth in the 1990s. Economists speak of the secular stagnation that had gripped an economy like St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Increasingly, the economy was becoming more dominated by services, including tourism services, but the vital personnel, educational, and social and infrastructural development were not being sufficiently addressed or at all to accompany and underpin the alterations in the economy itself. For example, an appropriate impetus for education and training was lacking. Further, there was no forward movement to build an international airport at Argyle or a jet airport in Canouan to accelerate tourist arrivals. Moreover, the legal and institutional framework for a sustainable development in international financial services, consistent with global best practices, was not in place and was not seriously contemplated. Other vital areas of a modern post-colonial economy nationally in a competitive regional and global economic setting were woefully neglected. Mr. Speaker, very early, the ULP administration moved away from the policy limitations of the preceding 17 years and adopted a sustainable, people-oriented path to development. Steady, moderate economic growth with some upward spikes marked the 2001 and 2007 period inclusive. The 2008 to 2013 period experienced negative or low economic growth rates as a consequence of a bundle of external factors. Still, St. Vincent and the Grenadines has held things together and has made solid progress on a number of indicators reflecting improvements in this condition of life and infrastructural development. Mr. Speaker, the economy of St. Vincent and the Grenadines has been battered over the last 5 years by a combination of externally sourced factors or circumstances, including the global economic downturn from September 2008 and continuing, the ongoing elevated oil prices, a string of natural disasters manifesting deleterious climate change globally, the virtually complete removal of market preferences in the United Kingdom for our principal export commodity bananas, and the meltdown of two regional insurance giants, CLICO and BICO, with liabilities for St. Vincent and the Grenadines amounting to 16% of the gross domestic product. These exogenous shocks have occurred in a context of a small, structurally dependent, heavily indebted, resource-challenged, vulnerable, open economy, which is St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and against the backdrop of weak, undercapitalized indigenous banks and other financial institutions regionally in the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union. An economy with a weak or limited internal demand, like St. Vincent and the Grenadines, is by definition vulnerable and is by itself incapable of generating self-sustaining growth. Accordingly, economic growth and development depend on its capacity to produce goods and services competitively, not only for consumers at home, but importantly for those who reside overseas or who come to St. Vincent and the Grenadines as visitors or tourists. The productive capacity and the volume of production of goods and services in the economy of St. Vincent and the Grenadines are substantially a function of the extent of the mobilization of domestic resources, land, labor, capital management, and external supports, capital, technical, and managerial skills, in a requisite enabling environment in a context of viable, sustainable consumer markets. The efficacy of the governance arrangements, the quality of this physical and socio-cultural infrastructure, and the array of appropriate public policies facilitate the creation of the environment for optimal living and production. Education and training are vital in the development of a quality and adaptable labor force, including management. A sound competitive financial system domestically, but with external linkages is required for the mobilization of financial resources. Foreign direct investments, grants and soft loans to government, and remittances from our diaspora overseas are the critical levers for externally sourced public and private investment. The development and modernization of the physical and socio-cultural infrastructure, airports and air transport, seaports and sea transport, roads, telecommunications, electricity, housing, water, solid waste disposal, health and social security, sports, culture and entertainment, religious worship. To have these to a sufficient level, they are essential to the enterprise of modern life and production. The ULP government's policies and their implementation have been directed to all of these essentials and more. They constitute the central features of the government's praxis. But behind these seemingly lifeless categories are real flesh and blood people who daily give expression to life, production and consumption. The people and their manifold interactions and interconnections make up the fascinating study of political economy, which includes but goes beyond the important yet narrow confines of the fiscal issues. At the level of the central government, certain significant consequences flowed from the initiatives taken by us, by our government, to reorient our economy and society onto a more balanced developmental path. Both recurrent and capital spending increased substantially over the past 13 years. Even after discounting the 2014 expenditure numbers by 1/3 to account for central government spending is much higher now than in 2001. Among the results of our policies in vital spheres of government include an increase in the number of public servants by almost 1/3, from roughly 5,000 to approximately 6,300. The increase was most marked in the areas of education, health, and national security. And we must note them. A sharp rise in salaries, occasioned by annual increments, pay increases, bonuses, and an extensive reclassification exercise. These increases cumulatively went beyond, at least by 1/3, the inflation rate for the period 2001 to 2013 inclusive. In 2001, wages and salaries amounted to $142.4 million, and the sum of $14.6 million was allocated for pensions and NIS. Note those numbers in 2001. 142.4 for salaries and wages, 14.6 million for pensions and NIS. In 2014, the approved estimates for wages and salaries is almost double the 2001 figure and now stands at $271.4 million. The 2014 figure for pensions and NIS contributions is now $52.3 million, nearly 3 times the 2001 figure. These 2014 numbers, Mr. Speaker, underestimate the full extent of these increases. Since in 2014, employees who were on the central government's payroll in 2001 are now in new statutory entities such as the Community College, BRAGSA, the Tourism Authority, National Parks, Rivers and Beaches Authority, the Standards Bureau, and so forth. They are now accounted for separately. So the nearly twice increase in salaries and wages, it's even more if you take into account what is the hiving off into statutory bodies, several central government employees, hundreds of them. Then there are several notable recurrent programs have expanded markedly in our time in government, including the following. And I list just 4 of them. 1, social welfare, including public assistance, in 2001 amounted to just under $10 million. In 2014, the budgeted sum is in excess of $25 million. Recurrent spending on education, the second one, educational programs through the Ministry of Education amounted to $55.6 million in 2001. The comparable figure in 2014 is $112.78 million, twice the figure of 2001. Additionally, in 2014, expenditure in tertiary education is in excess of $14 million, nearly 3 times the figure in 2001. And I'm not taking into account the $6–7 million annually since 2003 in respect of the economically disadvantaged student loan program. Thirdly, the recurrent spending on police, fire, and Coast Guard services in 2001 amounted to $24.9 million. The comparable figure now is $42.1 million. And recurrent spending on health and the environment amounted to $38.82 million in 2014. In 2001, the comparable figure now is $63.3 million. And then, Mr. Speaker, the new recurrent programs after 2001, right up to the present time, 2014. So I have indicated, if honorable members would note, a consequence of what we have pursued. I'm giving an example because I will come to address serious fiscal issues and put the options before the people. So I have, so far, Mr. Speaker, in this regard, shown the size of the public service, the wage bill, the pensions, the matter of the expansion in certain existing programs, and I've given some critical ones. And now I'm going to talk about new programs which we have instituted. The YES program, $3 million. Home help for the elderly, $1 million. Transport subsidy for school children, $840,000. Duty-free concessions annually on barrels, $2 million. Revolving Farmers Support Fund, $6 million. Special housing material support for the poor, $2 million. Support for employment and training for post-secondary and university graduates, $1.5 million. Establishment of diplomatic missions in Havana, Caracas, and the consular office in New York, $3.2 million. The establishment of NEMO, $700,000. Adult and continuing education, $2.4 million. Pre-primary education, $1.5 million. Maritime administration, $320,000. The energy unit, $310,000. The regional integration and diaspora unit, $260,000. And then, Mr. Speaker, over the period, there has been the implementation of a huge public sector investment program in the areas of roads and bridges, airport development, education, health, national security, water and electricity, housing and lands, air transport, disaster management, tourism and agriculture, public administration, sports and recreation, community and social development. And of course, in this period, we have reformed the tax system to engender fairness and equity, a reduction of the tax burden, efficiency in tax administration, and the facilitation of socioeconomic development. Mr. Speaker, I've extracted several issues from the 2001 to 2014 economic history. And arising from that history, I want to turn our attention to some critical issues of fiscal policy, not in the abstract, but in the real. Mr. Speaker, in my budget speech in this Honorable House on the occasion of the presentation of the 2013 budget, I drew attention to the fact that the economy of St. Vincent and the Grenadines is sui generis, the Latin word meaning of its own kind, unique. S-U-I-G-E-N-E-R-I-S, sui generis. Accordingly, last year I laid out a series of practical issues for policy consideration. Among other things, I addressed critically the oft-repeated general advice of the IMF for, quote, unquote, emerging markets and developing countries to embark upon the policies of fiscal tightening and monetary easing in the context of downside risks and global economic uncertainty insofar as the small, vulnerable, open economies of our currency union are concerned. I insist that this general advice from the IMF of fiscal tightening and monetary easing in the context of downside risks and global economic certainty insofar as our small, vulnerable, open economies are concerned, that advice from these global financial institutions must always pass the tests of relevance, appropriateness, and a correct reading of our region's economic history for us to embrace it. I repeat, the small, open, dependent island economies of the currency union are sui generis. Analysis and prescription must recognize this, and we must have the intellectual rigor and confidence to say so. This is not a textbook thing that you read inside of any general economic text for first year or second year students. This is something of an entirely different nature. Accordingly, a correct fiscal policy in the current domestic and external circumstances has, as I stated in my budget, to be creatively sculptured without unbalancing the overall economy and weakening internal demand. A correct fiscal policy balance has to be struck between the requirement of permissible fiscal buffers over time and the need to stimulate further the economy. Mr. Speaker, over the almost 13 years of this government, there has been extensive assessments of our fiscal policy. In the period 2001 to 2008, inclusive, prior to the global economic meltdown, the discussion centered on the efficacy of my government's countercyclical fiscal policy, which contained two central elements: an increase in public spending, recurrent and capital, and a reduction of corporate and personal income taxes to enhance private consumption and investment. Such a policy was justified in the extant circumstances so as to enhance the quality of life and create wealth and employment. My government acknowledged that a countercyclical fiscal policy was only sustainable for a relatively short period of time. Accordingly, by 2006, a tapering off of recurrent expenditure increases was in place, save and except for the significant salary increases for public servants, including teachers, police officers, and medical nursing personnel, due especially to the implementation of a reclassification exercise in the public service in 2007. On the capital side, there was focused, necessary development expenditure. In July 2008, oil prices skyrocketed internationally to US $147.50 per barrel. And in September 2008, Lehman Brothers collapsed, giving rise to a financial crisis which metamorphosed quickly into a horrendous global economic depression, the worst for almost 100 years. On August the 13th, 2008, my government commenced the planned construction of the Argyle International Airport, an absolute economic necessity and the largest capital project ever in our country estimated to cost roughly $265 million US, or some 700 million Eastern Caribbean dollars. Globally, after 2008, the fiscal response globally, after 2008, the fiscal response oscillated between austerity and stimulus. In St. Vincent and the Grenadines, we in this government considered austerity to be counterproductive. Instead, we fashioned some fiscal space for a measured stimulus package. So to suit the specific unique circumstances of our country's economy and fiscal condition, we advanced the fiscal framework of prudence and enterprise. Prudence on all fronts, especially on recurrent expenditure, but focused enterprise in fiscal activity through targeted capital spending of the central government and the capital budgets of state enterprises such as VINLEC, CWSA, National Properties, National Lotteries, Petrocarib, and the International Airport Development Company. At the same time, vital reforms were introduced in tax administration so as to enhance tax collection without increasing the rate of taxation. In my budget address from 2009 onwards, my government made it plain that it will not succumb to an ill-advised austerity advocated by some locally, regionally, and internationally. I have listened, Mr. Speaker, to their mantra of severe cutbacks in recurrent spending and of tax increases. In St. Vincent and the Grenadines, I say to the people that their austere expenditure cuts, the advocates of austerity, their austere expenditure cuts would undoubtedly include a socially indigestible menu. What would they do, the advocates of austerity? Abolish the YES program and the Home Help for the Elderly program. Cut public assistance. Remove the payment of annual increments to public servants. Cut sharply the allocations to goods and services, material and supplies, including medical supplies. Lay off workers and public servants. Cut subventions to the St. Vincent and Grenadines Community College and some other public enterprises, and the University of the West Indies. Slash payments to the students of the School of Nursing and grants to university students. Remove duty-free concessions on Christmas barrels and to religious institutions. Cut back on special employment for road cleaning. Roll back the housing and land distribution program for low-income and poor persons. Shelving implementation of the support for employment and training program for college and university graduates, and delaying the implementation of the farmers' support program. The austere persons, the advocates of austerity, from these sorts of cuts and slashings, from these aggregate cutbacks, at least $65 million could be saved, quote unquote. But my government will not take that route in slashing expenditure in this austere way. The advocates of fiscal austerity also recommend tax increases, some of them including on the VAT, which they suggest could yield at least another $20 to $30 million in additional revenues. But my government will avoid that kind of austere action. I await with great interest the recommendations of those in this Honourable House who clamour for austerity, a balanced budget, and a surplus on the current account at a time of continuing global and regional economic uncertainty and downside risks and low growth in the domestic economy. Prudence is to be distinguished from austerity. Prudence means careful spending. It demands sensible expenditure controls. It calls for the elimination of waste and inefficiency in expenditure. It summons a fair and efficient system of taxation and its administration. Austerity, on the other hand, means a harsh application of spending cuts and the avoidance of necessary and desirable expenditure and an increase in the tax burden. Prudence, when coupled with enterprise, leads to economic growth. Austerity presages continued low growth and socioeconomic hardship, particularly in the current global and regional economic circumstances. Whatever the applicability of this austerity thesis elsewhere, it holds no resonance in an economy like that of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. First, it must surely be realized that most of government's borrowings are external to St. Vincent and the Grenadines by way of soft loans from international entities such as the World Bank, the Caribbean Development Bank, the Alba Bank, the Petrocarib, and friendly countries such as Taiwan and Venezuela. Thus, the theses of the government sucking up capital and crowding out private investment have limited validity. Indeed, there is an excess of liquidity in the domestic commercial banking system. Secondly, the domestic private sector generally loses confidence in this country when the government restrains from spending, not when it ramps up public spending. Further, and most importantly, the restoration or achievement of competitiveness has less to do with a deflation occasioned by a homegrown austerity and more to do with other internal factors, the cost of investment monies, labor and managerial efficiencies, the extent of the business friendliness of public administration and so forth, and a set of exogenous economic financial variables. It is axiomatic that prudence, efficiency, effectiveness, and accountability in public finance are most desirable. Sustainable debt management is obviously a critical factor in the overall management of public finances. Further, all things being equal, it is preferable to run a surplus on the current account, or indeed on the overall account, recurrent and capital, than to run deficits. But in an economy such as St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and in the current global and regional economic context, all things are not equal. Accordingly, fiscal prudence, reasonable enterprising risks, and manageable public debts are an admixture worth pursuing to engender economic growth, create wealth and jobs, and strengthen the social safety net. Thus, to those who query, what's wrong with austerity? I answer emphatically. Austerity is a dangerous idea because it does not and cannot work in a socio-economic milieu like St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Austerity may balance the books, but it will certainly unbalance the country. Mr. Speaker, I have put down our marker as to our approach on fiscal issues arising from the consideration of the relevant issues in our economy and our economic history from 2001 to the present time against the backdrop of what we met. I turn now to the economy and its strategic path. Mr. Speaker, you may recall that after I'd finished the discussion on the disaster and its consequences and what we are doing, I urge that in this debate we put the central macroeconomic issues on the table. What are the policy options? What is the strategic path? And what are the programmatic elements? I've done some of that. I move now to the economy and its strategic path. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, it is important for us to remember that the economy is much more than what the government does in the fiscal sphere, vital though that is. Workers, farmers, managers, bankers, hoteliers, manufacturers, the electricity provider, telecommunications companies, and assorted producers of one kind or another produce and trade in goods and services. Domestic and foreign investors start up business enterprises to create wealth and jobs and provide taxes. It is evident that by far the bulk of the volume and value of the goods and services produced in St. Vincent and the Grenadines is aggregated cumulatively by and through the private sector, even though the single largest employer of labor and the single largest investor is the public sector. So, the state sector looms large in the economy, but the growth engine is located collectively, primarily in the private sector. The cooperative economic sector completes the triad, which works in a harmonious whole across the range of economic activities. The small size of the domestic economy and its integration in a dependent position in the global economy conspire to elevate the critical importance for us of that global economy, foreign direct investment, external trade in goods and services, and the political economy of state-to-state relations. Despite all the challenges to the economy of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, in the post-2008 global economic slowdown and continuing, we have been able to withstand its worst effects compared to some other small island economies, including in the Caribbean. There are several reasons account for this. First, significant population centers are located in areas which produce agricultural commodities and fish. Thus, food for sustainable living poses much less a problem than in some other island economies. Secondly, out of an active labor force of roughly 45,000, some 1/5, 10,000, is employed in the public sector. Thirdly, 3 important entities employ a significant number of persons. The Mustique Company and the Canouan Development Projects, 1,000 employees each. And the cruise ships, especially the Royal Caribbean Cruise Line, employ about 2,500 on them. Thus, these 3 private employment sources and the state sector employ some 1/3 of the active labor force. The nature of these 4 sets of enterprises means that they have thus far been able to withstand the worst employment effects of the global economic crisis. Fourthly, significant investment in Canouan at Bocament and in the state sectors, central government and public enterprises, has kept investment at reasonable levels. At the same time, other foreign and domestic investors have contributed admirably. Fifthly, there has been little or no fall off in remittances from abroad, which account for around 7% of GDP. And sixth, significant capital inflows to the public sector have occurred largely through grants and soft loans. Seventhly, our people's resilience, adaptability, and productive endeavors have helped in the economic stabilization in a particularly challenging period. And finally, our government has managed the socio-economic apparatus sensibly and well. Mr. Speaker, the rural economy has taken a particular battering because of the decline in the banana industry, measured at first and then more sharply, owing to the almost complete removal of the market preferences for bananas and the evolution of altered market conditions in the United Kingdom. Partially compensating economic activities in the rural areas have come from agricultural diversification and through increased employment of sections of the rural population in the public sector and in the private sector on mainland St. Vincent and in the Grenadines, particularly in construction, tourism, and wholesale and retail services. Mr. Speaker, honourable members, Given the socio-economic backdrop, the strategic path for our country's economy, development, and job creation includes the following specific policy directions in the short to medium term. And I'm going to list these policy directions. And thereafter, Mr. Speaker, I will give particulars as to how we are implementing those policy directions, so that there's a logic which flows from everything which I'm presenting here this evening, so that the people of this country can have a coherent view as to where the government is going. There may well be another view, but we are saying where we are, what we have been doing, and where we are going. What are these policy directions? The delivery of cheaper electricity in continued reliability through renewable sources of geothermal and solar, and further enhance efficiencies of hydro and diesel plants. The further consolidation and expansion of the education revolution so as to lift teacher quality and improve markedly student results generally, but especially in the areas of mathematics, applied science, technology, and assorted skills required for life, production, and the optimal development of a modern competitive economy. Sectorally, the focus is on agriculture and fisheries, tourism, information technology, manufacturing, construction, financial and other services, including the cultural and entertainment industries. In all these economic sectors, the government's policy is directed not only toward the creation of an enabling environment, but also to partner with the private sector, for example, in farm investment and the construction or expansion of hotels. The modernization of the health sector to better deliver all-round quality health care. The completion and operation of the Argyle International Airport to enhance air access. The further development of the country's physical infrastructure, including seaports, airports, roads, and housing. The continued delivery of reliable and quality telecommunications and water at competitive. The improvement in air and marine transport between St. Vincent and the Grenadines and other countries and within St. Vincent and the Grenadines. The further development of sporting and cultural facilities. A continuing emphasis on disaster preparedness within the context of a robust public policy on the existential issue of global climate change. The further strengthening of a sustainable safety net for the poor and retired persons. The further improvements in the delivery of good governance, including the strengthening of citizen security, the enhancement in the quality and efficiency of public administration services, the robust protection of individual rights and freedoms, the further bolstering of responsive and responsible democratic government, and waging the ongoing fight against corruption. The pursuance of a fiscal policy of prudence and enterprise, sustainable control of any deficit, and more efficient tax administration. The deepening and broadening of regional integration, the further advancement of an activist, independent, principled, and pragmatic foreign policy, lodged within the contours of the core principles of the Charter of the United Nations and in accordance with the interests of the people of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Those are 15 seminal policy directions. Within the context of these strategic policy directions, the following practical measures, among others, are now being currently undertaken by my government. The completion of the Argyle International Airport before the end of 2014 and its operation immediately thereafter. Our investment in LIAT and our role in strengthening the oversight capacity of ECA are all part of the enhancement of air access. The activist unfolding of a partnership between the government and VINLEC and external entities of IMERA, Reykjavik Geothermal, and the Clinton Climate Initiative on the geothermal project with the aim of constructing an initial 10-megawatt plant by the end of 2017. The building of a potentially fruitful partnership between the government and VINLEC and NRG of the USA to provide substantial solar energy. The further elaboration of plans, practical plans to construct a modern city at the Arnesville site of the E.T. Joshua Airport after the commencement of operations of the Argyle International Airport. Additional transport linkages between Arnoldsville and Kingston are part of the plans. The modernization and relocation of Port Kingston. In addition to the preliminary study for its relocation to the western end of the city, the study on this matter, Mr. Speaker, has been extended by the Caribbean Development Bank to include consideration of Arnoldsville for relocation. The continuance of significant private sector investment, including foreign direct investment in tourism, agriculture, telecommunications, energy, construction, wholesale and retail trade. The pursuance of a program of fiscal consolidation within the framework of prudence and enterprise, so as to ensure, among other things, that fiscal deficits and debts stay within manageable limits. The revenue collection and tax administration measures are part of this overall exercise. The provision of substantial capital resources in the 2014 estimates under the classification Economic Affairs include, giving you all what we are doing, and the 2014 estimates, which are the basis for the appropriation bill. These are the things which we have for Economic Affairs. An allocation of $97.5 million towards the Argyle International Airport. $4 million for the Agricultural Modernization and Development Program under a European Union grant of some $34 million over a 3-year period, known as the Banana Accompanying Measures, the BAM. $6 million for the Farmers Support Revolving Fund. $7.3 million for tourism and private sector development. $2.1 million for CARSIP, a regional telecommunications project in the public sector. $1 million to complete the ICT Center, the Information Communication Technology Center. $7 million for the rehabilitation of the Leeward Highway this year, out of a CDB soft loan of $44 million for this 24-month project. A $4 million expenditure allocation towards the rehabilitation of the VG Highway. A $1.2 million for the rehabilitation of the Morris Road. A $2.2 million allocation for this year's expenditure on the Langley Park River Basin rehabilitation. And a $2 million for the Kingston Bus Terminal redevelopment. Then, Mr. Speaker, the provision of capital resources in the 2014 estimates for education, aimed at improving the school plan, developing further technical and vocational education, integrating ICT with the teaching and learning process, and lifting the quality, the delivery of teacher quality. Specific projects for 2014 include, on this educational issue, 1 laptop per child for secondary school students, costing $13.6 million. I've been advised by the Foreign Minister, Mr. Speaker, that the check will be, the money, which is a grant from the government of Venezuela, should be sent to the suppliers sometime this week, and within a couple of weeks thereafter, a few weeks thereafter, they'll be shipped from the suppliers in England to us. Just imagine, Mr. Speaker, in the midst of our recovery, every secondary school child and in the post-secondary institutions would get an Acer laptop in a bag with Microsoft software, indefinite in the life of that laptop. So that's the first one, in the educational. A further $4 million for the improvement of education through ICT. $4.6 million for technical, vocational, and education training. A $1.5 million support employment and training set program for college and university graduates. I've been advised that the circular, the advertisement went out on Friday, and this program is to begin maybe the middle of February or sometime towards the end of February. A further $4 million for the Basic Education 2 program for pre-primary, primary, and secondary education. a further $1 million for the book loan scheme. That's education. Mr. Speaker, you may recall I spoke about the strategic direction in relation to health. What are we doing in 2014? These are the capital resources. $9 million for the modern medical complex at Georgetown, scheduled for completion by the end of this year. $9.4 million for the modernization of the health sector through a grant from the European Union of $35 million to be spent over 3 years. A $1.2 million towards the refurbishment of the Milton Cato Memorial Hospital. A further $600,000 for the purchase of equipment for the hospital. Mr. Speaker, it is to be noted that the categories economic affairs, education, and health account for 81.2% of the capital budget for 2014, approved in the sum of $257.1 million. Then the ongoing implementation of $54 million soft loan project from the World Bank, touching on concerning disaster preparedness and climate change under the rubric of Regional Disaster and Vulnerability Reduction Program. This is a 5-year project. Capital expenditure on it in 2014 amounts to $8.2 million. And then, of course, the recurrent expenditure budget plus amortization and sinking fund contributions of $654.4 million, in which strategic objectives are met under 9 functional classification heads, 4 of which, general services, education, economic affairs, and social protection, account for 78.4% of the recurrent expenditure. Mr. Speaker, I presented the situation from what we met broadly, without going into any details, because I don't want it to be overladen with partisan political discussion. I go to what has happened in the economy for that period of 13 years since we have been in office. I address the fiscal issues which have arisen in all the economic circumstances, the public policies, outline the strategic path in the economy and the directions, and now I have shown what we are doing practically this year in relation to those objectives, in relation to those directions. That's what the budget is about. To present you this coherence. Mr. Speaker, this government does not govern without a clear developmental framework, regionally and sectorally. Accordingly, late last year, 2013, we launched formally the Economic and Social Development Plan for St. Vincent and the Grenadines, 2013 to 2015. This is to be read in the context of a deepening regional integration in the OECS, CARICOM, PetroCaribe, ALBA, and the Community of States of Latin America and the Caribbean. Further plans exist or are being elaborated or updated in every single one of the other sectors or subject areas. So, Mr. Speaker, we have had all of these plans. This is what we are doing. I said to this Honorable House, however, that our plans can go awry if the external economic challenges arising from the global economy and nature do not subside or are ameliorated, because we make our plans on the basis of certain assumptions. And these plans can go awry because of the nature of the international environment. What, therefore, is the external economic prognosis? In relation to nature, well, we just simply strengthen our resilience and work in a friendly manner with nature. So what, however, is the external prognosis of the global economy? Let us first state the basic facts in summary form. In 2013, the economy of the USA experienced real growth of a less than moderate 1.6%. The IMF has forecast economic growth in the USA at 2.6% for 2014. So in 2014, the world's largest economy is poised to pick up on its growth rate. In the Eurozone countries, there's a marginal gradual progress from a 2013 growth rate of minus 0.4% and an IMF forecast of 1% in 2014. In China, growth is expected to slow somewhat from 7.6% in 2013 to a forecasted 7.3% in 2014. In the emerging markets, such as Brazil, Russia, India, Turkey, Mexico, and South Africa, there's a cautious wait and see from a growth rate in the aggregate of 4.5% in 2013 to an IMF forecast of 5.1% in 2014, but loaded with downside risks. The cumulative expansion of the world economy in 2013 is estimated at 3.1%. The forecast for 2014 is 3.8%. Still, the overall picture of the global economy is uncertainty and unevenness, particularly in our major trading partners, coupled with an insufficiency of growth in jobs, but with an optimism that things economic are improving, yet still below the level of economic activity pre-2008 and indeed fewer jobs. Disturbingly, the less than stellar growth in the recovery of the US economy has confounded many reputable economic analysts who had predicted an imminent acceleration in the economy from 2010 onwards. But the actual economic performance was not robust. 2.5% growth in 2010, 1.8% in 2011, 2.8% in 2012, and below 2% in 2013. These very analysts insist that faster pickup in the US economy will occur in 2014. Still, other mainstream economists do not share this unbridled optimism. And the IMF, though upbeat on the US economy, forecasts a modest 2.6% growth for it in 2014. The IMF's chief economist, Olivier Blanchard, does not envisage that the global economy will rebound in a relatively stable manner until the end of 2016. If this view proves to be correct, as is likely, and given the time lag of economic growth in the USA and Europe on small Caribbean economies like St. Vincent and the Grenadines, the sustained upturn in dependent tourism-based economies of our region may not be evident until the end of 2017. Notice sustained upturn in these dependent economies. A gradual moderate level of growth in our region's major economic partners in the USA and Europe will assist in keeping us afloat, but it is unlikely to facilitate the requisite lift unless the peculiarities in the individual Caribbean economies provide opportunities for accelerated advance. In the case of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, I had earlier commented on some possibilities for realization in our peculiar sui generis, though not isolated context. Mr. Speaker, broadly, a pertinent query of a general kind arises from consideration. Can a socio-economic model initiated by Robert Milton Cato, refined by Sir James Mitchell, and further reformed under the ULP government in a small, vulnerable, resource-challenged and dependent economy like St. Vincent and the Grenadines be sustained? Can this model be sustained without profound adjustments or alterations during a prolonged global recession or continued economic slowdown? If the answer is yes, then incremental accretions and a wait-and-see approach is plausible. If the answer is no, what are the adjustments or alterations to be made, and in what time frame? My government is satisfied that appropriate alterations and/or adjustments are necessary and desirable in order to attain a relatively secure level of economic sustainability. Fundamentally, this is the analytic frame which has guided the policy reforms of my government and their urgency in diverse areas of the society, the economy, and polity, which I summarized earlier. In the challenging external environment which lies ahead, these reforms and structured alterations are required more than ever to be accelerated. We cannot rest on our laurels. We cannot afford the luxury of wait and see or ill-considered temporizing or indeed excessive caution. Renewal must continue apace. Lethargy is not an option. Focused, hard and smart work and production will bring progress, wealth, and job creation. I turn now to a brief consideration of the economic and social sectors. Mr. Speaker, I have provided a broad overview of the economic and fiscal issues. The ministers here who hold the respective portfolio responsibilities in relation to agriculture, forestry, fisheries, tourism, industry, telecommunications, creative industries, housing and lands, construction, road transport, external trade, wholesale and retail, will address each of these subsectors specifically in their budget presentations. Economic data and analysis are included as an addendum, as an appendix to my address, and constitute part of it. It is a 50-page document circulated under the title St. Vincent and the Grenadines Economic and Social Review 2013, prepared by the Ministry of Finance and Planning. Mr. Speaker, traditionally there has been a picking out of little bits here and there. What I've done is to get the Social and Economic Review comprehensive prepared by my ministry, and I've attached it as an appendix so that persons would not be engaged in discussion in this Parliament blindly. I want us to lift it in these challenging circumstances. And this is why I've included it here, prepared by the officials. Naturally, I had to sanction it because it constitutes part of my address. But it is there. Real economic growth in St. Vincent and the Grenadines for the year 2013 is preliminarily estimated at 2%, following upon real economic growth in 2011 of 0.28% and in 2012 of 1.52%. Economic growth in 2013 was led by construction, agriculture and fisheries, and manufacturing. Economic activity in tourism was mixed. A real economic growth for 2014 is projected at 2.5%. Preliminary data indicate, and Mr. Speaker, I'm just giving one or two highlights here from the review, just a page or so that persons can read the whole review. Just want to deal with what connects with the narrative I'm presenting. Preliminary data indicate a 16.3% increase in construction activity for the period January to September 2013 compared with the corresponding period for 2012. Growth in value added in the agricultural sector resulted from higher production of root crops, vegetables, bananas, and livestock. Preliminary data show fish landings improved during the review period, January to September last year. What did we have there? An 8.4% increase in the volume of fish landings and a 16.6% rise in the value. In manufacturing, economic activity expanded in 2013, in the 2013 review period, with increases in the output of flour of 9.8%, mill feed 11.8%, animal feed 8.9%, and beer 35.2%. Total visitor arrivals for the review period, January to September 2013, increased by 2.5% over the corresponding period of 2012, totaling 145,703 visitors compared to 142,122 visitors in 2012. But the performance of the various tourism subsectors was mixed. A 7.7% increase in sea arrivals and a 4.9% decline in air arrivals. The data show increases in yacht visitors, up 0.5%, and cruise visitors, 12.8%, and declines in same-day arrivals, minus 4.6%, stopover visitors, minus 4.9%. The high cost of air travel and the slow economic recovery regionally and globally are the main reasons attributable for the decline of air arrivals. Still, stopover visitors account for the majority of visitors to our country. I reiterate, honourable members, that without hard and smart work in each area of economic activity, our country will not progress as much as it should. Better and more productive attitudes to work and production are essential to wealth and job creation. These fundamentals must constitute the core of our culture. And in this regard, Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the workers at the Port Authority who went out on New Year's Eve to unload the vessel from Trinidad with a lot of supplies when many persons were enjoying their Christmas Eve, their New Year's Eve celebrations with their families. And they went beyond that, donating their entire overtime to the relief effort. Similarly, Mr. Speaker, I have outlined the broad parameters for the year 2014 on matters relating to education, health, the environment, social development, and other social sectors. But the ministers with specific responsibility for these and related subjects will address them in detail. However, in respect of education, I reiterate the overwhelming importance of quality teaching and schools leadership, good parenting, and optimal student effort to achieve better educational results. It's not a mystery. In the areas of health and wellness, our unhealthy behavioral habits and lifestyles will be our undoing. We must all resolve to embrace healthy living. We must remember that our major killers are hypertension, diabetes, cardiac ailments, violence, and accidents. We must thus, particularly in these challenging times, alter our lifestyles and behavior for the better. Enhance individual and social responsibility ought to be at the top of our New Year resolutions, and one of them is that I must lose some weight. I turn, Mr. Speaker, to the issue of national security. Mr. Speaker, I have dealt with all the central economic issues in terms of the strategic path. I have remaining to deal with some insurance matters and the fiscal measures. And I will come to those, but I want to address one or two sectoral matters of great importance. National security. Mr. Speaker, my government will continue to upgrade and strengthen the framework to bolster the security and safety of the citizen and the nation. Central to this exercise is the enhancement of the overall working environment of the nation's security forces, mainly the police force, the Coast Guard, the prisons, the immigration service, the fire service, their allied security organizations, and specialized entities like the Financial Intelligence Unit, Customs and Maritime Administration. The national security apparatus is linked inexorably to the regional security system and the security institutions of CARICOM, certain international security agencies, and the security systems of some traditional allies. From a policy standpoint, the ongoing upgrading and strengthening of the framework for a national and citizen security and safety is grounded in the principles and programs. And Mr. Speaker, let me just pause here. You notice how I began this paragraph, from a policy standpoint. Because this debate should be about policies and specific programs within the policies. Saying from a policy standpoint, the ongoing upgrading and strengthening of the framework for national security and citizen security and safety is grounded in the principles and programs as detailed in a resolution on national security adopted by this Honourable House in February 2013, the Durant Report on Reform in the Police Force, the policy decisions of the RSS and the regional security agencies in CARICOM, and the cooperation regimes devised through certain international mechanisms and organizations. These policies find targeted expression in the strategic and day-to-day work of the security apparatus of our country, as reflected formally by and large in the strengthening of the legislative framework to fight crime, in the pronouncements of security officials, especially the Minister of National Security and the Commissioner of Police, and the result indicators in successive estimates approved by this Honourable House. The result indicators in the 2014 estimates cover in a succinct way the policies and programs to be pursued in 2014 in relation to a wide range of citizen and national security issues, touching and concerning the following among other things: the regime for CARICOM and OECS migration and immigration generally, firearms, pan against crime, the National Commission on Crime Prevention, security for the yachting and tourism industry, maritime administration, the police, fire service, Coast Guard, prisons, Port and Airport Authority, the regulation of private security firms, the cadet force, community policing, lifting the quality of security personnel, and legislative reforms to fortify the security forces in their fight against crime. The physical facilities of the security forces continue to be upgraded. In this respect, no government hitherto has done as well as my government. The record speaks for itself. Still, as always, more work is to be done. Accordingly, work on the upgrade of the Old Montrose police station is ongoing, a project executed with funds mainly from the Republic of China, Taiwan. Very importantly, the Canouan Coast Guard facility was completed last year and is operational. The Coast Guard base was constructed with resources from the United States of America under the Secure Seas program of the Caribbean Basin Security Initiative of President Obama. In the 2014 approved estimates, substantial capital provisions are made for the rehabilitation of the Union Island and Spring Village Police Station, the establishment of substations at Belair and Fancy, a further upgrade of the Belial Correctional Facility, including the construction of a correctional wing for females, the purchase of vehicles for the police, prisons, Coast Guard, and immigration departments, and the purchase of other equipment for the various branches of the security forces. Overall, in 2014, in the 2014 approved estimates, recurrent spending on the police force, fire and Coast Guard service, prisons and the immigration department amount to $47 million. In the 2001 estimates, the corresponding figure was $23.5 million, less than one half of the 2014 estimates. In 2014, there are 1,170 officers for these 5 services: police, Coast Guard, prisons, immigration, fire. In 2001, there were 880 officers. So we have an increase of 290 in 2014 over the 201 figure. It is noteworthy that the expenditure on salaries and allowance for the security forces in 2014 is twice that of 2001. Mr. Speaker, citizenry and national security is the business of everyone and every nurturing or supportive institution in the society, but especially the family, the church, peer groups, the schools, civil and community organizations, the media, the trade unions and business sector, the security institutions and those of law and order, including the law courts and lawyers, all the mechanisms of the state and the economy. It is through a focused, coordinating approach of these institutions and persons within them that we can better tackle crime and the causes of crime. Although St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Mr. Speaker, is a relatively safe country in which to live, it has to be acknowledged that the dangerous neighborhood in which our country is located and the small minority of criminals among us constitute an ongoing challenge which we must face resolutely as a law-abiding people. My government's central policy in this regard continues to be tough on crime and tough on the causes of crime. Mr. Speaker, on the issue of immigration, I'd like to just refer to a few issues of immediate relevance. First, the landmark ruling by the Caribbean Court of Justice in the Shanique Myrie case last year has clarified a bundle of legal considerations of practical import relating to intra-regional travel by nationals of the member states of CARICOM to ensure that St. Vincent and the Grenadines is fully compliant with community law, including the ruling of the CCJ. The Attorney General, the Chief Immigration Officer, the Director of Regional and Integration Diaspora Unit, and the Office of the Prime Minister have put appropriate measures in place, including the specialized training of the immigration officers on the issue and the publication of a fact sheet for all visitors to inform them of their rights as migrants to St. Vincent and the Grenadines, as well as the state's obligations. Secondly, my government has entered into a contract in the amount of $3.5 million with the Canadian Banknote Company to design and produce an enhanced e-passport. Work is well advanced on this project, and it is expected that by the end of the first quarter of 2014, an even more secure travel document, the e-passport, will be available for issue to our nationals. Meanwhile, renovations for a relocated immigration office costing $1 million are being done to the upstairs and an area downstairs of the former D's Services building on Bay Street, which was purchased by my government. Further, this renovated immigration office will be furnished optimally to provide the best possible working and service environment for the staff and general public alike. This facility will complement the recently modernized and upgraded electoral office in the downstairs of the same building. This is part and parcel of the ongoing process of providing upgraded facilities and accommodation for the delivery of vital services to the public. The many examples of this do not require any further reiteration at this time. Mr. Speaker, I have said it repeatedly. The people of this country, if there are only two books inside of their houses, one is the Bible and the other one is the passport. Well, the Bible is, the King James Version is over 400 years old, and a lot of those exist. And we have to make sure that the other book, the passport, because we are a traveling public, is of the highest quality, and we provide all the necessary facilities for the people of St. Vincent and Grenadines in that regard. These simple policy positions. Mr. Speaker, I want to turn to the international airport, and I want to speak of this in some detail because of its importance, and as always, I have to report to the people. Mr. Speaker, the construction of the Argyle International Airport is on target for completion by the end of 2014. This historic existential facility of magnificence is a dream of generations of Vincentians being realized before our very eyes. This airport is not only pivotal for our nation's social connectedness with the outside world, but for our economic development, particularly regarding external trade in commodities and tourism. On August the 8th, 2005, I laid out the blueprint and strategy for the building of the Argyle International Airport. And on August the 13th, 2008, actual construction started. Over the past 5.5 years or so of construction, my government and its relevant agency, the International Airport Development Company, has not wavered from the main contours of the articulated blueprint and strategic framework of 2005. Numerous countries and regional and international agencies or financial institutions have facilitated us in our efforts, mainly Cuba, Venezuela, Taiwan, Trinidad and Tobago, Mexico, Austria, Turkey, Iran, Georgia, Libya, PetroCaribe and the Alba Bank, the CARICOM Development Fund, the Exim Bank of Taiwan, the First Caribbean International Bank, the Bank of Nova Scotia, the Export Development Corporation of Canada, the Exim Bank of the USA, and the National Commercial Bank, Bank of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. The airport is being built and equipped at a cost of some $700 million. More than one half of the project is financed through grants in cash or kind and land and property sales by the government. The balance is financed through soft loans from Venezuela, Taiwan, and the CARICOM Development Fund. When completed, the Argyle International Airport will have a runway of 9,000 feet long and 150 feet wide. The passenger terminal building handed over to the IADC on the 30th of December 2013 is designed to handle about 1.5 million passengers annually through its 2 terminal sections, domestic and international. The airport will be able to accommodate jets as large as the Boeing 747-400s and will allow for direct flights to St. Vincent and the Grenadines from the USA, Canada, Europe, and South America. Mr. Speaker, at December the 31st, 2013, 89% of the earthworks at the airport site would have been completed. Sea defense works at the northeastern end of the runway commenced on the 12th of August 2013 and will extend into mid-2014. These works are being done by the Châteauguay Chavez contingent, the CCC contingent, in accordance with designs prepared by the Maritime Engineering Services, ASTIMAR, of Cuba. The CCC contingent has also begun work in creating an embankment into Stubbs Bay at the southern end of the runway. The embankment is done primarily to allow for the installation of the simple approach lighting system for the airport. There is, too, a social benefit in that the embankment will create a sheltered area in the Stubbs Bay, making it safer and more enjoyable for people to swim. Some drainage works are completed and others are ongoing. All drainage works and the covering of the Yambu River are scheduled for completion by the end of June 2014. The IADC has entered into a contract valued at 8.99 million EC dollars to purchase the Armco metal sectional drain arches from the Mexican firm Trinity Industries. By the end of last year, 18 of the 45 containers had arrived in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and the other 27 containers are expected to arrive before the end of January 2014. The IADC has created a work team in-house to assemble these culverts under the supervision of engineers from Trinity Industries. Mr. Speaker, in September 2013, pavement works began with the laying of stony base materials on the runway, which base laying is continuing from this month. After this, the work of placing the final layers of asphalt and concrete pavement of the aprons, taxiways, and runway will begin. In November 2013, the IADC took delivery of 2 batching plants, one for asphalt and one for concrete. These 2 high-capacity plants cost a total of 10.2 million EC dollars. The assembling of these plants has been completed, and their commissioning will take place this very month, along with the training of the plant operators. Support equipment for the hydraulic concrete works have already been ordered, most of which have already arrived on site. Similarly, with loan funds of 8.9 million EC dollars from the CARICOM Development Fund, CDF, the IADC is in process of procuring and supporting equipment for the asphaltic concrete works on the runway. The equipment will soon be available to the IADC for the asphalt pavement works on the runway to be done from February to June 2014. The stone crushing plant, purchased at a price of 2.86 million EC dollars with funding from the CARICOM Development Fund, and which has been operating since February last year, has been producing most of the aggregate required for the pavement works. So far, a large amount of the aggregate required for the pavement works has been produced. From this month onwards, stone crushing activity is being done in 2 shifts to increase the production of aggregate in order to keep the concrete and asphalt pavement works proceeding on time. All of the AFE lighting equipment, costing 2.5 million EC dollars and funded by the CARICOM Development Fund, have been received and are in storage at the airport site. The process of installing the lighting equipment will be done during the first quarter of 2014, together with the pavement works. Mr. Speaker, I assure this Honourable House that all matters relating to a land use plan, the quality control of work, wind studies, the collaboration with the relevant regulator, the Eastern Caribbean Civil Aviation Authority, ECA, and in accordance with the recommendations and guidelines of the International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO, are well in hand and in order. So that is the earthworks. I turn, Mr. Speaker, to the landside facilities now of the airport project. These landside facilities, Mr. Speaker, if I may just say this, we have purchased an asphalt plant, a concrete batching plant, and a stone crusher, all of the highest quality. When we are finished with the airport, we have those to do a lot of roads in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And we have a lot of trucks too. So that's a legacy for the infrastructure sector. I turn to the landside facilities of the airport project. These landside facilities consist of the passenger terminal and electrical substation, the control tower, the air rescue and firefighting ARFF facilities, the cargo terminal building, the access roads, and parking. As I indicated earlier, Mr. Speaker, the passenger terminal building and electrical substation were handed over to the IADC on December the 30th by the construction company, Overseas Engineering Construction Company of Taiwan. The construction cost of this facility is $75.6 million EC. The design cost for the facility was done by SESI of Taiwan at a cost of $8.8 million. So the terminal building, which is seen there, is $84+ million. The process of retrofitting the terminal building with the requisite furniture and equipment has commenced. It promises to be a most beautiful, modern, and user-friendly facility. The IADC is in collaboration with a reputable international company on the installation of solar energy facilities for the terminal building. The control tower at the Argyle International Airport will be located on the ridge at the former residence of the late Carl Glasgow, who was a strong supporter of the airport project. Carl would be very pleased. The aircraft, rescue and firefighting building will be located obliquely opposite the passenger terminal building on the eastern side of the runway. Processes have commenced to ensure the completion of the construction of these two facilities by August 2014. In respect of the control tower, IADC has already entered into a contract of 14.3 million Eastern Caribbean dollars with the Aeronav Group of Canada, funded by a loan from the Scotiabank of Canada, for the supply and installation of the traffic control cabin and tower communication equipment and airfield navigational aids. IADC has also made a deposit payment on 3 firefighting trucks and equipment to allow for the delivery by September 2014. These fire trucks and equipment cost over $7 million Eastern Caribbean and are being funded by a loan from the Scotiabank of Canada, underwritten by the Export-Import Bank of the USA. Regarding the air cargo terminal, IADC expects that the contract to construct this facility will be awarded by March 2014 for completion of construction by September 2014. My government had hoped for a private sector entity to finance, construct, and operate the cargo terminal, but the discussions with interested private sector firms proved to be too protracted. So IADC will build it and possibly lease its operations out to a private sector entity. Similarly, the IADC is in active conversation with relevant private sector operators for the financing, construction, and operation of a fixed base operation and several aircraft hangars. Work should commence imminently on these. The other aspects of the airport's construction are well in hand, namely the terminal building access road, the Argyle Gardens access road, and the Raraku Mount Pleasant access road, the landscaping, environmental management, and the relocation of the petroglyphs. As regards the latter, the IADC has set aside funding in the amount of $460,000 to meet the cost of the relocation. It is working in tandem with the National Trust on this. There have been some unfortunate delays with the Egyptian team engaged for this purpose. Mr. Speaker, it would be recalled that in 2005, the original estimate for the airport's construction was put at EC $480.6 million by a Canadian company, Marshall, Macklin and Monaghan, as an update of the costs contained in their 1998 report entitled St. Vincent Airport Development Phase 1 Final Report. But that's what M&M said in their report. But then you have to do the designs. So having received the final designs of the airfield in December 2007 from the Cuban designers, the IADC was now able to review the cost practically of the construction of the airport in late 2008, arriving at a revised total cost of $589 million Eastern Caribbean. The number has been revised upwards to approximately $700 million, due mainly to the higher cost of constructing the terminal building and other landside facilities, additional lands for landside facilities, increased earth and site works, and general cost escalation. It is worth noting that the experts have repeatedly advised that the alternative international airport site at Kitchen would cost at least twice that at Argyle. Mr. Speaker, in January 2013, I informed this Honorable House that the IADC had advised that it would require approximately US $80 million, just over 200 million Eastern Caribbean, to complete the construction of the airport. I explained then, in January 2013, when I came to present my budget speech, I explained that the sources of funding had not yet been sufficiently concretized for their entry into the 2013 and 2013 Estimates and Appropriation Bill. Accordingly, when the probable funding sources had reached the requisite level of maturation, I came to this Honorable House later in 2013 with supplementary estimates and a supplementary appropriation bill in respect of funding the International Airport project, in accordance with the law and the highest level of transparency for which my government is widely recognized by dispassionate observers nationally, regionally, and internationally. Approximately $100 million Eastern Caribbean or so of that 2013 appropriation has been included in the 2014 Estimates and Appropriation Bill. So it's not new money. It's the same money from last year's supplementaries, which is brought over into the new financial year. The relevant sources of financing for the completion of the construction of the International Airport project are land sales at Canawan, 54 million EC dollars. Two Scotiabank loans, $28.9 million EC. CARICOM Development Fund, $8.8 million EC. Alba Bank, 108 million EC. Taiwan Exim Bank, 27 million EC. Of these aggregate sums, slightly less than one half, or $93.2 million, that is one half of the Alba loan, and nearly 3/4 of the monies from the land sales. The status of the remaining monies is as follows. The balance of the Alba loan would be drawn down in accordance with the agreed timetable over the next few months. The payment of the remainder on the land sales is likely to be completed by the end of March 2014. Early this year, we will draw down from the two Scotiabank loans. And the drawdowns on loans from the CARICOM Development Fund and the Exim Bank of Taiwan will begin in the first quarter of this year. The IADC has assured me that once it receives all the earmarked resources on a timely basis, it would meet the deadlines it has given to the government. Meanwhile, Mr. Speaker, the practical matters relating to the promotion, marketing, and management of the airport are proceeding favorably. We expect that some of the international airlines will enter into service agreements this year with the government of St. Vincent and the Grenadines to operate out of Argyle International Airport. The Chief Executive Officer of the Tourism Authority, Glenn Beach, in conjunction with the IADC and the Office of the Prime Minister, have been driving these promotion, marketing, and management initiatives. In due course, more would be said about them. I turn to disaster preparedness and management. Mr. Speaker, the three recent natural disasters, Hurricane Thomas in October 2010, the April floods in 2011, and the Christmas disaster of 2014, have yet again highlighted the extreme vulnerability of our country to the damaging occurrences of nature. Thus, strengthening our country's overall resilience and enhancing its capacity to respond to and manage disasters and their risks are vital policy questions of top priority to my government and the people of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. So too is the existential matter of the deleterious effect of global warming and climate change, to which small countries in the Caribbean, such as ours, hardly contribute. Yet we are on the front line of the adverse fallout from global warming and altered climate patterns. Mr. Speaker, normally this is a subject which doesn't command people's attention. But at a time like this, I want to speak to it in a little more detail. Because the simple truth is that prior to the advent of my government in office, there was little or no provision made for disaster management, and the issue was barely on the country's radar screen. The basic facts speak for themselves from the 2001 estimates, which were left for my government when we assumed office on March 29, 2001. In the recurrent estimates for 2001, under the rubric local government / disaster preparedness, there were 2 staff positions only. A local government officer who doubled up as the National Disaster Coordinator at a grade 7 level and a senior clerk. In addition to his secondary work as the National Disaster Coordinator, this official had to carry out his primary duties as the local government officer, which included the direct superintendents of the Kingstown Board, the district councils, the small towns and village councils, which had subventions of $3.3 million. There was no specific subvention for disaster preparedness. The result indicators in the 2001 estimates, then called the key results, in fact for 2000 and 2001, pointed to inactivity on this matter. In the capital estimates of 2001, there was a provision of 1.2 million out of a 2.5 million European Union STABEX-funded SVG Emergency Recovery and Disaster Management Project to enhance institutional capacity, which was woefully lacking after 16 years of NDP governance. But nothing had been spent on that project in the 2 preceding years, 1999 and 2000. Then there was an allocation of $7.6 million out of a $15.8 million World Bank funded Emergency Recovery and Disaster Mitigation Project, but not 1 cent was spent in either of the 2 preceding years when the project was included in the estimates. Indeed, the NDP government had failed to meet any condition or to do anything at all for nearly 3 years in respect of this significant World Bank loan, with which EU funding was linked. Matters were so that within 1 month of the ULP government's tenure in office, the senior World Bank executive responsible for the Caribbean formally informed me that the World Bank funding was withdrawn for this project because of the lethargy of the government of St. Vincent and the Grenadines since 1998. Imagine this, losing $16 million in World Bank money, plus a further 2.5 of EU resources because of inattention and lethargy on disaster preparedness from 1998 to March 2001. I persuaded the World Bank to remain steadfast on this with our new government, to give us a chance, so to speak. Immediately, I, as Prime Minister, assumed responsibility for disaster preparedness. Yes, I tap it, I, because I am the person who was Prime Minister. I was the Prime Minister and the Minister of Planning. And I took away the portfolio from local government and put it to Prime Minister so that we can lay a basis to get the World Bank to give us back the money. Yes. I assumed responsibility for disaster preparedness and brought it to the center stage of policy making, away from the fringes of the local government portfolio. We set about promptly to establish a national emergency management operating center and to select a director for the National Emergency Management Organization, NEMO, in accordance with the World Bank specifications and guidelines. It is through that project that my government constructed the NEMO headquarters, the Layou Waterfront Project, and several other small capital projects in the field of disaster preparedness, strengthened the institutional capacity to respond to natural disasters, fashioned a national disaster preparedness plan, and put a comprehensive legislative framework in place. By then, of course, the price tag for the project was way in excess of the contributions of the World Bank's $16 million and the European Union's $2.5 million. My government had to source the additional resources elsewhere. Mr. Speaker, the building at the Old Housing and Development Corporation building, I'm not laying the technical issue at the feet so much of the government. There was a small sum for building up, take off the roof and build it up. Mr. Speaker, when you took off the roof, it was revealed that the whole edifice was limestone. You had to break it down completely and build from scratch. And then because it was a site near to the river, they hadn't put in the extent of the river defenses. I had to put that in. And they hadn't put in the bridge, which I had to rebuild, which was near to it. I haven't spoken about that before. I was there at the beginning of it. I can't take myself away. Mr. Speaker, from 2001 onwards, my government adopted the United Nations Blueprint for Disaster Risk Reduction, called the Hyogo Framework for Action, HFA. We accordingly elaborated appropriate programs for disaster risk management from these international guidelines, as distilled by the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency, CDEMA, formerly CIDERA, and applicable to our local conditions. The HFA has 5 overarching principles: making disaster risk reduction a priority, identify, assess, and monitor disaster risks, and enhance early warning, build understanding and awareness, reduce the underlying risk factors, and preparation and readiness to act. Under each of these rubrics, NEMO laid out plans, and it has acted in conjunction with other state, private sector, civil society, regional and international agencies. Mr. Speaker, as part of the quest to upgrade markedly the institutional framework for disaster risk management, which is at the heart of my government's policies, I piloted it in this Honorable House in 2006, a modern comprehensive bill known as the National Emergency and Disaster Management Act, Chapter 388 of the Laws of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. This law, in the process, repealed and replaced the law which was governing disaster preparedness, the National Disasters Relief Act of 1947. Mr. Speaker, it is unfortunate that many persons make the error of assuming that the 9 member staff at NEMO, including the director, constitute NEMO. That is certainly not the case. Essentially, they are the Secretariat of NEMO and the core of the National Emergency Operating Center. The National Emergency and Management Act spells out clearly that NEMO is comprised of 3 entities. The National Emergency Council, of which there are 44 members, broad-based and chaired by the Prime Minister. The National Emergency Executive Committee and its 10 subcommittees, that's the second. And the disaster management, the district disaster management committees, of which there are over 40. As Prime Minister, under the law, I am empowered to give the director policy directions of a special or general character relating to the functions of the director, and the director is obliged to give effect to the directions. That is a law based on the best practices, which was advised by SIDERA. In a natural disaster, the director has to take not only general, but special instructions from the Prime Minister. This is not a question of people holding consultations with Tom, Dick, Harry, and Mary. There is a NEMO with 44 persons, broad-based. We get there to do work. And after that legal framework is dealt with, no entity external to that can demand to enter that process. We function in accordance with the law. The broad responsibility of the director is to coordinate the general policy of the government relating to disaster management in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. As a condition for accessing its resources in 2001, the World Bank insisted that the director be successfully trained at both the undergraduate and graduate levels. In the 2014 estimates, the salaries and allowances for the 9 staff members of NEMO is over $350,000, with office expenses of over $300,000. In 2001, the total salary of the 2 public servants, with oversight of both local government and partially disaster preparedness, was $60,000. The coordinator in 2001, who as I've indicated was a part-time person with disaster preparedness, because his substantive duties were local government officer, his salary, he was a grade 7 with an annual salary of $38,000. NEMO's director today is in a grade C, formerly grade 12, with an annual salary of over $75,000 plus expenses. This is a serious business. Prior to the 2013 Christmas disaster, NEMO had planned in 2014 to focus on the following: a review of the legislation and related mechanisms governing the operations of NEMO, using the UN's Hyogo framework for action, collaborating further with SIDEMA, the World Bank, the Red Cross, and other bodies in strengthening disaster management institutionally and in the provision of upgraded physical assets or facilities, better prepared shelter managers, community groups, and district disaster management committees in the area of disaster risk management, and the enhancing of NEMO's working relationship with regional and international partners on a wide range of regional disaster preparedness programs, including coastal warning systems. All these are important goals to accomplish. But after the Christmas disaster, they must be intertwined practically with the rehabilitation and recovery project at hand. In the capital estimates of this year, there is a composite provision of $8.2 million out of a $54 million soft loan from the World Bank under the Regional Disaster and Vulnerability Reduction Program. Among other things, this year, this program would build and stock emergency relief warehouses at Sandy Bay, Rose Hall, Union Island, Beckway, Georgetown, Mesopotamia, and retrofit comprehensively the Dorsetshire Hill and Kingston Primary School for use as emergency shelters. A major upgrade in NEMO's telecommunication system is also in the offing. Meanwhile, NEMO is working with SIDEMA to elaborate a more efficacious comprehensive disaster management program to serve St. Vincent and the Grenadines for another 10 years. Mr. Speaker, in the immediate aftermath of the Christmas disaster and continuing, several initiatives in particular ministries or departments have come splendidly to the aid of those who have been adversely affected. Let us take a few examples. First, NEMO's investment in the training of teachers as shelter managers and assessors of the socio-economic loss to families has paid off well, as many of these teachers responded to the summons to assist the Ministries of Social Development and Planning in making the social assessment. Similarly, the Ministry of Health has been able to call on at least 20 of the 60 trained counselors in the primary and secondary schools to help in the psychosocial counseling of persons in the communities who have been traumatized in the disaster. Before this government, there was not one trained counselor in the primary or secondary school system. Likewise, the coordinated work by BRAGSA along other state agencies and private entrepreneurs to clear the roads in the early days was instructive and remarkable. So too the coordinated efforts in delivering water to communities in the first 10 days or so after the disaster. This coordination is envisaged under the National Emergency Management Act. All of those entities are in the Emergency Council, not extraneous persons. Equally, the tremendous usefulness of the learning resource centers, the refurbished community centers, and newer or rehabilitated primary schools has yet again been established as emergency shelters at a time of natural disaster. The public expenditure on all of these have paid dividends in the relief of human suffering of the affected persons in the disaster. Simple things, Mr. Speaker. All the new schools we have built have water tanks on them. All the learning resource centers have water tanks on them. The upstairs and downstairs schools, they have toilets and bathroom facilities upstairs and downstairs. We have built them to sustain winds of 150 miles per hour. That is all part of the process. And when we are doing them, and they cost more money, people complain that you're spending the money on wasted things. The Rosebank Center, which we just refurbished, we have 4 big water tanks behind it. The one we have done up in Rose Hall, Rillan Hill, we can go through the whole set. The evidence is there before the people's eyes. Mr. Speaker, I now address the entirely bogus issue advanced by some critics of the government about alleged political partisanship in the delivery of food, water, and other relief supplies, and the false spectre of further possible discrimination on political grounds in the distribution of building materials and household appliances. Anyone familiar with the way in which NEMO, the shelters, the district or community management, disaster management committees handle the distribution of food, water, and such like supplies will know, they would know, that it is practically impossible to have the distribution tainted or compromised by political discrimination. Similarly, the way in which the distribution of construction materials or the reconstruction of houses in the wake of Tropical Storm Lily, Hurricanes Ivan and Thomas, and the April 2011 floods, landslides was done, indicates that the very structure or systems which are in place do in fact mitigate against political discrimination. Moreover, the cabinet minutes will reveal my reiteration of the government's policy of non-discrimination on political or other such jaundiced grounds. We have taken an oath to uphold the Constitution, and the members of my government do abide by that oath. Undoubtedly, in any mass distribution of supplies to affected persons, some efficiencies may occur, but not political. Some inefficiencies may occur, but not political discrimination. And we must give credit to the public servants and community activists involved in this process, who selflessly, tirelessly, and honestly man the distribution process on the ground. There has not been, and there will be no political bias using the distribution of supplies to the persons affected by the recent disaster. Mr. Speaker, I want to say this. Before the advent of this government, after a natural disaster, when you came out of the shelter, you were on your own with a few sheets of galvanized through the normal public assistance program. From Tropical Storm Lily onwards, we have taken it on ourselves to build houses for people which have been destroyed or damaged. And our only limitation is the extent of the resources. I want to make that point very clear. And the fact that I've already mobilized over $10 million worth of building materials for the persons who have suffered, whose houses have suffered, is a clear indication that this government is strengthening its public policy in helping the vulnerable to put themselves back on their feet. Meanwhile, Mr. Speaker, I continue to urge that all metaphoric soldiers turn up for duty at and with NEMO for assigned tasks in our recovery effort to make St. Vincent and the Grenadines stronger and better, to lift it higher, to raise it up further. Mr. Speaker, none of us must have any vanities in a natural disaster and have any qualms about reporting for duty. None. And I just want to say this parenthetically. Ministers of Housing and Social Development during the time when I was in the opposition would know that I will take forms and I will wait, even as leader of the opposition, wait on them outside to go to them and say, look, I have some people here whom I'd like to be helped. Is it possible to be? I myself, as leader of the opposition, you think I felt a sense of vanity that I can't go to somebody? No. That is not how you function. You report for duty. Mr. Speaker, I turn to the issue of energy. The 2014 national budget is occurring at a time when the country is beginning to feel the increase in electricity costs due to the effect of the recent flooding on the country's hydroelectric facilities. This development and VINLEC's response is a significant issue in the energy sector in 2014. Growth in electricity sales of 2% in 2012 over sales in 2011 was not repeated in 2013. Electricity sales in 2013 were practically at the same level as 2012. The uncertainty in the international economic climate continues to impact the local environment in all sectors of the economy. In 2014, VINLEC is predicting a modest growth in electricity sales of 2% over the projected sales for last year. The cost of diesel fuel for the generation of electricity continues to affect the resulting fuel surcharge on customers' electricity bills and, by extension, the cost of electricity. In 2014, the company is projecting to use 6.9 million imperial gallons of diesel, costing $77 million for the generation of electricity. Last year, 2013, the expenditure on diesel was $73 million. In view of the projected modest increase in electricity sales, the company's operational and capital expenditure program have been so tailored to reflect prudence and efficiency. The capital expenditure program of VINLEC in 2014 would be driven by the need to optimize the nation's renewable resources for the production of electricity in an effort to reduce the price of electricity and its volatility, to curb the national dependence on fossil fuel, and to improve energy security. The rehabilitation of the hydroelectric plants at South Rivers and Richmond, costing approximately $6 million, is scheduled to be completed in 2014. However, this program of works has been impacted by the recent heavy rains and flooding that affected all three hydroelectric facilities, South Rivers, Cumberland, and Richmond. The total cost of rehabilitation and mitigation measures to protect the hydroelectricity infrastructure at these facilities is estimated by the company to cost at least $14 million. This expenditure has not been included in the estimates for the company in 2014, but it will be necessary to complete the repair works, and the company will seek financing to carry out these repairs. In the area of renewable energy, the company is holding discussions with NRG Energy of the USA for the installation of a 1.5 megawatt solar PV system at the Argyle International Airport, as well as pressing forward with the completion of the installation of the remaining 338 kilowatts of its announced 500 kilowatt system. By year-end 2014, we anticipate substantial solar PV installations. The project of solar installations on vital government buildings is continuing apace. In preparation of the estimates of revenue and expenditure for VINLEC for 2014, the management has ensured that adequate provision has been made for the maintenance and operation of the company's power plants, as well as for the maintenance of the critical transmission and distribution infrastructure. Provision has also been made for all the necessary systems to support the generation, transmission, and delivery of power to customers. The National Insurance Services. Mr. Speaker, the spillover from the global financial crisis has greatly stressed the financial systems worldwide. In St. Vincent and the Grenadines, the NIS has been severely impacted, mainly through declining investment incomes and profits. Indeed, net income for the NIS has declined from $27.1 million in 2008 to an average of $9.3 million for the three-year period 2010 to 2012. Contributing to this decline in performance, too, is the rapid increase in benefits costs as the number of pensioners and the value of pensions rise. In my 2013 budget address, I outlined a number of reform measures which will be implemented in order to preserve the long-term financial sustainability of the NIS. It is important that participants understand the financial challenges looming for the NIS and the potential risks to future benefits that these difficulties can pose unless the requisite reforms are urgently effected. Participants must understand that the only alternative to reform is future insolvency and disorderly adjustment. At the same time, reforms must be structured in a way that respects the legitimate expectations of current participants. The major reform measures which are being implemented include an increase in the contribution rate from the current level of 8% to 10% with effect from January 1st, 2014. A gradual increase in the number of years required for pension eligibility from 500 weeks to 750 weeks. A gradual increase in the retirement age to 65 years starting in 2016. A change in the rate of pension entitlement for each year of service. And a change in the reference wage used to calculate the pensions. At the same time, pensions in paid, the maternity grant, the funeral grant, the NAP funeral grant, and the employment injury grant have all been increased with effect from January this year. Mr. Speaker, the details of all of those I had outlined in last year's budget speech, and I don't want to go over them, and they are inside of the review document, which is there as an appendix. Government is also, Mr. Speaker, continuing with its plan to reform the public service pension system. Public service pensions absorb a considerable amount of public resources, 11.3% of revenue in 2013. This is set to increase in the coming years. Since established government employees are eligible for both NIS and government pension, Workers who retire with the maximum allowed years of service would be entitled to a pension with a replacement rate of up to 127% of their salaries. There is no reasonable justification for workers to retire with combined pensions in excess of their wages prior to retirement, especially that these benefits are based partly on a non-contributory plan financed by the taxpayers. I don't think anybody will quarrel with this to say, how can you have somebody, when they retire, they'll get more money from both the NIS and from the state pension higher than their salary? That's not sustainable. Accordingly, the government is now exploring options for the reform of the public service pension system and will be holding discussions with all stakeholders on this very important public issue in the coming months. One of the reform measures we have started, one of the reform measures being considered is the increase in the retirement age for public servants in order to ensure that the retirement age is aligned with that of the NIS. Careful consideration will have to be placed on the transitional arrangement for such a measure so that the existing officers are not placed at a disadvantage. I turn to the BICO-CLICO issue. Mr. Speaker, it may be difficult for some to believe, but next week marks 5 years since that day in late January 2009, when CL Financial's disastrous financial situation became public. The people of our region have exhibited admirable patience and resilience throughout this period. Despite the considerable fiscal difficulties of the governments of the currency union, significant progress has been made in helping and protecting the interests of policyholders of the British American insurance company BICO and CLICO in the currency union. This progress has been achieved by immense toil and determination. Since the presentation of the 2013 budget, much progress has been made, and I report accordingly. First, the currency union governments agreed with BICO and Sagicor Life, Inc. in 2012 to recapitalize and sell most of BICO's traditional business, the sale of which was completed on the 15th of March, 2013. Sagicor has now assumed the responsibility for this business and, partly utilizing funding from the currency union governments, has undertaken to make payments to persons with that type of policies for claims or bonuses due to them. Nearly 3,000 persons in St. Vincent and the Grenadines have had their policies transferred to Sagicor and are once again in a position to operate those policies. In St. Vincent and the Grenadines, close to 300 persons have benefited or will benefit from being paid over $3 million in outstanding claims. Having assisted most of BICO's traditional policyholders, we were able to focus our attention on those individuals who acquired annuities from BICO. To this end, the support of the government of Trinidad and Tobago has been critical. In addition to the original $50 million US received in 2009 from the CARICOM Petroleum Fund, a further $100 million US was pledged by the government of Trinidad and Tobago at the CARICOM Heads of Government meeting in July 2012. In December 2012, the first $36 million US was received with the appreciation of the currency union. This first payment allowed us to commence the Currency Union Policyholders Relief Program, which is focused on assisting holders of BICO's annuity policies. These policies, although less in number compared to the traditional business, represent by far the greater losses to those individuals and organizations that hold them. For this country, this program may assist over 2,000 policyholders. Phase 1 of the program commenced in early December 2012 and closed at the end of March 2013. Holders of FPA policies with under $30,000 in their August 2009 account balance were able to receive that amount plus a refund of the premiums they had been paid since that date. Across the currency union, 3,231 policyholders received $19.3 million. In St. Vincent and the Grenadines, in that phase 1 of the program, 716 policyholders received $4.5 million. Phase 2 of the program commenced on the 18th of March 2013, when policyholders with EFPAs and FPA2 policies with principal balances under $30,000 were invited to apply for assistance. Across the currency union, $27.5 million have been paid to 2,296 policyholders. In St. Vincent and the Grenadines, $5.1 million have been paid to 374 policyholders. I just want honorable members to appreciate this. In the case of the traditional policy, we have 3,000 persons who have benefited. Under phase 1 of the annuity program to help the policyholders, the relief program, 716 persons, Vincentians, were assisted. In phase 2, 374 have been assisted, and now we have phase 3. In November 2013, phase 3 of the program commenced, where all remaining individual policyholders may now apply for payments of $30,000 each. Under this phase, 631 persons in St. Vincent and Grenadines are eligible to receive $18.9 million. So far, just over 60% of all the policyholders in this group have made their applications. Priority attention is being given to those applicants who have been badly affected by the Christmas Eve storm. Whilst most payments in phase 3, this latter phase, can be met from funds on deposit at the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, while most payments, the full completion of the payments in this phase is dependent on our receipt of the promised additional funding from Trinidad and Tobago. Further, we are ever hopeful that this phase 3 will not be the end of the assistance to this group of policyholders, and that we'll be able to make further payments to them in the future when sufficient funds were made available. And I will come to where other funds can possibly come from. Thus, we are in a position now where we await the balance of $64 million promised by the government of Trinidad and Tobago. Remember, they promised $100 million in July 2012. They gave us 36 by the end of July 2012. They have 64 remaining. That will come in 2 ways. 40 million US in a development loan from the Caribbean Development Bank. We'll get that on a phased basis. It's Trinidad and Tobago government's loan for us. And 24 million directly from the government of Trinidad and Tobago itself. The loan to the government of Trinidad and Tobago will be paid to us over time based on the approval and commencement of new insurance regulation in the currency union, about which I will speak shortly. And we continue to press the government of Trinidad and Tobago for the outstanding $24 million that it promised us 18 months ago. And we await the arrival of those funds. I would like once again to acknowledge the work of the BICO staff and the judicial managers through the currency union in the Bahamas, who have provided invaluable assistance to the effective operations of this program, as well as the support to the Monetary Council. And as honorable members are aware, I have been mandated by the Monetary Council to head the insurance committee of the Monetary Council to address this issue of insurance. I also wish to express our appreciation to British American in Trinidad, which has been working with us to review policyholder data and to produce the necessary checks for payments. Litigation. During 2013, BICO's judicial managers continued to pursue a number of legal actions for the recovery of funds from various parties. The judicial managers have kept us up to date on the developments, and although litigation can be a frustratingly slow process, matters continue to advance for the benefit of BICO's policyholders. As the people of this country would know, the Supervisor of Insurance of our country has instituted legal proceedings against a commercial bank here in St. Vincent and the Grenadines in the region of about 145 million Eastern Caribbean dollars in respect of assets which ought to have been properly held on trust or custodianship for the benefit of BICO policyholders. CLECO International Life. In the matter of CLECO International Life, CIL, as noted in 2013, we are regrettably less advanced. The reports of the judicial manager, Deloitte Consulting, made to the law courts note a substantial shortfall in CIL's assets as compared to liabilities, and that the assets of CIL are highly illiquid, being dominated by real property and intercompany debts. The judicial manager in 2013 put forward a plan that requires financial commitments from the government of Barbados and the governments of the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union. The Currency Union's Core Advisory Committee has provided substantial feedback on a number of technical matters arising from the draft proposal, which to date has only been put to us at a very general level. So although we have not yet received a sufficiently detailed proposal to enable us to understand the costs and benefits of the proposal to our currency union, we remain as committed as ever to the implementation of a workable solution with the government of Barbados. Once we have received the required details, and mindful that we must provide both certainty and speed of outcomes to CIL policyholders, we would be in a position to conduct an assessment of it and provide more information to CIL's ECCU policyholders. The reform of insurance regulation in the currency union. I am pleased to let our citizens know that we have made substantial progress in implementing major reforms to insurance regulation in the currency union. Agreement has been reached at the ECCU Monetary Council to establish a single supervisor for insurance, which will assume both prudential and market conduct oversight of the insurance industry. We have worked with the existing single regulatory units in each territory, as well as technical experts, to devise a draft law and a comprehensive plan for the establishment of this new regulator, to be known as the Eastern Caribbean Financial Services Regulatory Commission. We have also worked hard to develop a reformed insurance law that incorporates modern rules and regulations for prudential and consumer protection. The draft law is currently in a consultative process with the insurance industry and senior government representatives. While not everyone in the insurance sector will be pleased with the direction in which the regulation is going, we are determined that the citizens of the currency union are entitled to have the best protection that we are able to provide. Some changes, such as the proposed increases in minimum capital for insurers, may well be challenging for some market participants to achieve. However, I would encourage market participants to recognize the opportunities that will present themselves in the new regime. Assuming all goes well, we anticipate that the law will be passed and the Commission will be established before the end of this year, with appropriate transitional arrangements to allow the industry to comply. Once these tasks are completed for the currency union, we anticipate that the full US $40 million advance from the CDB would be made available to the currency union for further assistance to the affected BICO policyholders. In addition to supporting the timely progress of this project, we in St. Vincent and the Grenadines are determined to remain at the forefront of these reforms and adopt the new laws for the benefit of our citizens at the earliest possible opportunity. I turn now, Mr. Speaker, to the fiscal measures. Mr. Speaker, in the current economic situation, globally and nationally, there is little room to raise taxes or large amounts of additional revenue. Similarly, there is little room to lower taxes or to make additional tax concessions. Our fiscal policy stance for 2014 will therefore continue to be a mix of prudence and patience and enterprise. During 2013, there were deficits on the current primary and overall balance of 2.3%, 3.9%, and 6.3% of GDP respectively. The current expenditure was reasonably restrained, save and except for the ballooning costs of pensions and retirement benefits and salary increases occasioned by the built-in 2% increment and the 1.5% back pay from January the 1st, 2011. Contributing to the current account deficit was a decline of revenues of 7.2% during the year 2013. Mr. Speaker, the decline in revenue was disappointing, coming as it did in a year when the nominal GDP was estimated to have grown by approximately 5%. And given the fact that you have a progressive taxation system, as persons who have followed this would know, you will have a number near to or above the increases, above the nominal growth in the GDP. A near quadrupling of capital receipts was not sufficient to outweigh the increase in capital expenditure of roughly 180%. So because of the high capital expenditure, the overall deficit widened. Mr. Speaker, I want to proffer the reasons as we see them for the decline in the revenue last year, the decline in the tax buoyancy, despite the fact that you had nominal growth in the GDP of approximately 5%. The decline in the tax buoyancy is attributable to three main factors. One, weaknesses in tax administration at the major revenue collection departments. Two, low and declining levels of tax compliance by certain taxpayers. And three, increasing level of tax concessions, particularly ad hoc concessions. The need for continued institutional strengthening and the capacity building of the major revenue departments has become more evident. Deficiencies in the daily operations and strategic focus by the revenue departments have contributed to this suboptimal revenue performance. Additionally, a critical system failure in the SIGTAS tax system during the first half of 2013, on which I reported to this Honorable House, set back the reform initiative for the Inland Revenue Department, which I had announced in the 2013 budget. Notwithstanding these setbacks, we have made some progress in the program for modernization of the tax system, including the introduction of e-filing at the Inland Revenue Department, including a complete upgrade of the IT system, successful implementation of the new property tax system with a conservative valuation applied to all properties. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, some taxpayers have compared their own private valuations with that of the valuation unit and have realized that their private valuation is much higher than that derived by the unit. And then we have had the full implementation of the Asicuda project, including the implementation of the customs website, and also the improvement in the use of risk management techniques to facilitate more timely clearance of imported goods, particularly for those importers on the Gold Card program. For 2014, the government will step up its efforts to strengthen its revenue system to make it a more buoyant and stable source of revenue and provide an environment hospitable to investment and growth. This includes the examination of the basic tax structure to determine whether a move away from the global tax structure is merited. Fundamental reform of this sort requires adequate preparation. Mr. Speaker, I just want to say that in my own way, I'm going to see how I could encourage the employees. I mean, for instance, today at lunch, I had 2 employees from Inland Revenue who I was informed on Thursday that their team collected $2 million on Thursday, 2 of them in a team. So I had them for a roti lunch with Sorrel and yeah, I paid for the roti. Huh? A prudent plan. Yeah. Prudent lunch, yes. Ginger beer, sorrel and Morby, and of course I had to have they had a glass of wine. I didn't because I had to do this job this evening. Vijay's roti, the best roti in the world, beef roti. I don't mind giving Vijay some publicity here. Excise tax, Mr. Speaker. The fiscal performance during 2013 highlights the need for further fiscal consolidation. However, fiscal consolidation cannot be effected only by restraint of expenditure. Wherever possible, revenue must also be augmented. In this regard, I propose to increase the excise tax on gasoline and diesel by 50 cents per gallon with immediate effect. This measure, which is estimated to yield an additional $3 million per year, will not apply to diesel used in the production of electricity. This will continue to be tax exempted. The increase in the excise is not expected to have any immediate significant upward impact on the price of fuel at the pump, as oil prices have been trending downwards in recent months. Mr. Speaker, if there is big jumps in oil prices, then I will review this imposition of the 50 cents per gallon. In the case of gasoline, the entire 50 cents can be accommodated by the lower price of gasoline. Indeed, I hereby announce with immediate effect that despite the increase in the excise tax of 50 cents on gasoline, the price of gasoline will be reduced by 13 cents per gallon. And the price of diesel will be increased by 35 cents per gallon. The new retail price will be diesel per gallon. The current price is $13.32. The new price will be $13.67 a gallon. The gasoline per gallon is currently $14.08. It will go to $13.95. So, Mr. Speaker, even though there's an increase by 50 cents a gallon, we notice in the case of gasoline there's a reduction in the price. Mr. Speaker, I am satisfied, as I conclude, that this budget will provide further strengthening of our nation's socio-economic base for recovery and reconstruction after the Christmas disaster, in the context of ongoing global economic uncertainty and downside risks. Even amidst all the pre-disaster challenges last year, my government took a series of measures to help our nation's economy, to put it on an even keel, keep it on an even keel, and to prod it forward with an estimated growth of 2%. Real economic growth. Still modest, but moving in the right direction. And comparably better than most of the OECS member countries and our Caribbean neighbors, including those with more economic resources than ourselves. Mr. Speaker, so traumatic has been the impact of the 2013 Christmas disaster that most people have probably forgotten my government's commendable initiatives, even in the 3 or so months before Christmas 2013. And I want us to remember some of them. The launch of a 12-year National Social and Economic Development Plan, 2013 to 2025. The award of the tax-free back pay of 1.5% from January 2011 to December 2013 to over 6,000 public servants, costing $10 million. The grant of land titles to 170 owners at Glebe Barrelly at 10 cents per square foot. The duty-free concessions of Christmas barrels for the 13th year running. The rollout of a $2.5 million road cleaning program in November, involving over 4,000 workers. The provision of $1 million for road patching just before Christmas. The startup of 15 more low-income houses at Green Hill with a labor force of 150 persons. The payment of $500 to each of 606 students for their performances at CXC, A-level or CAPE exams. The registration of the state-owned Farmers Support Company Limited to operate an initial $6 million revolving fund loan arrangement for farmers. The formal launch of the $46 million South Leeward Road project. The delivery to the government by the contractors of the $31 million St. Vincent and Grenadines Community College project of an additional 80,000 square feet of floor space. The commencement of the application process by 631 policyholders of BICO in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, whose policy values are in excess of $30,000 to be each paid $30,000 by the end of March 2014 at a cost of $16.2 million. A one-time retroactive payment covering 56 weeks, the 3rd of December 2012 to the 28th of December 2013, to 3,407 pensioners at the NIS, costing $917,000. The announcement at a further medical school in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, the St. James Medical School, will be established by May 2014. The stabilization and consolidation of the St. Vincent Building and Loan Association under the leadership of the Financial Service Authority. The commencement of the rollout of 3 huge capital projects. The $34 million modernization of health sector project financed by an European Union grant. The $54 million regional disaster vulnerability reduction project financed by a soft loan from the World Bank. The banana company measures financed by a grant of $34 million from the European Union. The initial export of 22 pounds of fish to the ethnic market in New York. The opening of the Smart Hospital in Georgetown by PAHO. The continued work on the nearly completed modern medical complex. The reclamation of the nation's patrimony by way of forfeiture of 100 acres of beachfront land at Chatham Bay, Union Island. The completion of or near completion of major items of physical infrastructure projects, including roads, bridges, playing fields, educational facilities, customs headquarters, the Hospitality and Maritime Training Institute, and a number of other renovated buildings in Kingston to house the governmental functions. The initiatives in geothermal and solar energy, the productive engagement with private sector investors, including those from overseas, our regional activist foreign policy on a number of vital issues, and so on and so forth. It is really breathtaking work for a government of real progress. But unless I reminded persons, many persons would forget that these things took place 3 to 4 months before Christmas. So traumatic is the Christmas disaster. My government, Mr. Speaker, will continue to look for ways to ease the burdens on the affected persons in the natural disaster. So in addition to all the relief and restorative work, small burdens would be eased. And you can rely on this creative government to ease the small burdens. Mr. Speaker, for example, passports which were damaged or destroyed in the disaster would be replaced free of cost. Similarly, relief in the payment of property taxes would be granted to persons whose houses are flooded, damaged, or destroyed. Number of little things like this to ease them. Despite all our real achievements and more, a new and different situation has arisen with the recent disaster. We have to take a fresh guard at the wicket. This budget and the supplementary estimates and the supplementary appropriation bill shortly to come are part and parcel of taking this fresh guard. Metaphorically, this is to enable us to adjust and readjust to the altered conditions, to score more and better, individually and collectively as a nation. In this massive recovery effort of Arise SVG with the 6 R's, I take inspiration, Mr. Speaker, and I find comfort from the words of the prophet Isaiah. These words draw out the better angels in us. God gives strength to the weary and increases the power of the weak. Even youths grow tired and weary, and young men stumble and fall. But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. Almighty God, the help of Israel and of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, has come to our aid. He advises us, do not fear, I will help you. And he will. I'm obliged, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.